Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Again, my name is Vin Dacquino, and I am a proud resident of Mahopac. Been here since 1986, and in about 1997, I saw a sign on Hill Street, and it said that Sybil Ludington rode by this spot in 1777 to help repel the British in Danbury, Connecticut, with Colonel Henry Ludington. And I said, what? I had no idea who Sybil Ludington was at the time. So I came here to the library, and I saw a young man with ponytail and glasses who happens to still be hanging around at 20 years later. And I said, Sybil Ludington. And he said, no. I said, not you. Do you know Sybil Ludington? He said, I think she died in the 1800s. He said, vertical file. Well, I went to the vertical file, and there was a file this thick. I said, what did she do? Well, it didn't take me long to figure out exactly what she did do. I found out that Sybil Ludington was one of our first responders. Connecticut was in trouble. The people were terrified. The British, with 2,000 men, marched from the shore right straight through Connecticut, terrifying the people. There was a rumor, a story, that possibly he was trying to go through Connecticut to find young boys, because young boys become soldiers. And he would kill them so that they wouldn't. Mothers were terrified. They hid their children, they hid their sons in basements and woods. It was a horrible night for Connecticut. And they needed to get help. So, what I discovered is that Sybil Ludington is a hero. She's on a statue on Lake Glenida for a good reason. On that night in April, a messenger arrived to the Ludington home. He said, Colonel Ludington, we need your men. Danbury is burning. The colonel said, who am I to send? It was 9 o'clock on a Saturday night, pouring rain. What we believe is that Sybil said, send me. She got on a horse. There was no one else to send. She was the oldest child. All the soldiers were out on the field. He was a colonel, but of the militia. His men were volunteers. They were home. It was April, planting season. 9 o'clock at night, no doubt about it. I'm sure they were not watching television. They were in bed. Someone had to go. We believe Sybil mounted her horse, went off into the night. Cowboys, Skinners, and the British wanted Colonel Ludington dead, because he did a wonderful job of keeping the cowboys and Skinners from stealing from the colonists. They would steal, especially the cowboys, would steal for the British. Well, the British wanted him dead too. They wanted those stolen goods. So they put a reward on his head. At any time, someone could have come to the house to kill the colonel. We have family records now that say that they came in the middle of the night and Sybil helped to keep her father alive that night. So the story that I got at that time was that Sybil took this amazing ride. 16-year-old girl. She had just turned 16 3 weeks before the ride. I said, are we talking about a female hero of the Revolutionary War? I have to get her story. So I began looking. It was amazing. According to the records, according to the history books, according to magazine articles, Sybil Ludington was the mother of 6 children, 4 boys and 2 girls. She married a guy named Henry, who was a lawyer in Catskill, New York. She lived in Catskill with her family and then moved with her family, her 6 children, and her husband to Unadilla, New York. Her son was a hero in Kansas for helping to found Fort Riley. Folks, I went to 22 cemeteries to find those 6 kids. Either they're still living or they didn't bury them when they died, because there were no graves. There was no grave for her husband either. Something was absolutely strange. Yet that paragraph appeared in almost every magazine from 1935 all the way up to 1997 when I started writing her book. Well, it took me 3.5 years to get it straight. 3.5 years to discover that a simple error in history books, I think I'm killing the mic. I don't need a mic. I have my teacher voice. It took, I have no idea what I was saying. What was I saying? No. So it took me 3.5 years to get it straight and to find out that Pelletreau, the history of Putnam County, had the colonel's 12 children. Next to Sybil's name, it said Henry Ogden. Only one problem. She didn't marry Henry Ogden. She married Edmund Ogden. And that threw off historians for years. So who was Henry? Well, after enough research, I found out that what actually happened was that they switched her husband's name with her son's name. Her son was Henry. He had 6 children, 4 boys and 2 girls. He was a lawyer in Catskill, New York. So, step by step, I went through to find the errors. Now I'm going to challenge everyone in here to go online, and I will bet you that it won't be long before you find at least one, if not all of these errors, still online today. Sybil was not born in Fredericksburg, New York, where she lived with her family until she was 23. She was actually born in Connecticut. They didn't get here until after they were married and after Sybil was born. Sybil was a year old when they came here. She did not marry Henry, Edward, or Edmund with a U, Ogden. She married Edmund with an O. Her husband was not a lawyer in Catskill, New York. Sybil did not marry her childhood sweetheart. She got married at 23 years old. In those days, she was an old maid before she got married. She was not the mother of 6 children, 2 girls and 4 boys. Her son was not a hero for trying to save women and children in Fort Riley, Kansas. You know who was? Her grandson. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. Ludingtonville, New York was not named in honor of her famous ride. If you go online, you'll hear that over and over again. Ludingtonville was named in the 1850s, long before we even realized Sybil took that ride. And it was named for her father, not for her, and not for her ride. She did not die at 78 years old. Why did we think she did? Mathematicians. She was born in 1761, and she died in 1839. If you do your math, that would make her 78 years old. And that's what the internet keeps saying over and over again. Except she died before her birthday. She never made it to 78 years old. She died at 77 and 10 months old. She did not ride through Kent, Connecticut to warn of a British attack. So who said she did? Oh no, watch this. In 1975, they created a United States postage stamp in Sybil's honor. Called her a contributor to the cause. Turn the stamp over, and it says, on the dark night of April 26, 1777, 16-year-old Sybil Ludington rode her horse Star alone through the Connecticut countryside, rallying her father's militia. Oops. She went through the New York countryside. The Patriots did not defeat the British in Danbury because of her efforts. So who said she did? Uh-oh. In the 70s, the DAR made its first collection of medals ever issued, a series consisting of 36 medals created as a tribute to the great women of the American Revolution. Sybil was listed as number 20. But on the back of the coin, on the back of the medal, it said, Sybil Ludington, she volunteered to ride alone through the New York countryside. They got that right. To muster her father's regiment. Her mission was crucial to the Patriot victory. There was no Patriot victory. We lost. Tryon came in. He burned Danbury, destroyed the supplies, and he was on his way out when they intercepted and fought the Battle of Ridgefield against him. It wasn't a Patriot victory. So why am I bringing these things up? Because it's crucial for us to understand who Sybil Ludington was. She was an amazing woman. And before this night is done, I hope to convince you that she was an amazing daughter, wife, daughter-in-law, mother, grandmother, businesswoman. She was an amazing woman. It is important that we remember her for who she was in the time that she lived. And the reason I'm on the mission I'm on is because I want to be clear about who Sybil Ludington was. And a terrible thing happened. After I wrote the Call to Arms, it lasted 20 years. And for 20 years, I've been doing tours in schools, talking in places just like this to help people understand who Sybil was. Well, in 2017, I had a rude awakening. I went back to the internet to find that Sybil, according to many people online, never existed. She was a myth, a legend. Others said the Danbury affair, her father wasn't even involved in it. The battle, insignificant. Somebody get that? No. Insignificant. And Sybil never took the ride. I became a man on a mission again. And I could not, will not, won't sit back and let people say that Sybil never existed. So I started a new mission. And I studied what I was seeing online. A very disturbing fact or accusation was that Sybil didn't take the ride, and we know that because mentions of the ride were from the family. And we didn't hear about them until 1907, 130 years after the ride. How can we believe that? And there are no real sources except family members. Then, in 2010 to 12, we began discovering a new source. A woman by the name of Martha Lamb, an incredible historian, wrote a book called The History of New York City. And in that book, she describes Sybil's ride. 1880. So people said, So some of my naysayers said, better. 1880 is certainly better than 1907. But she didn't give any sources. And that shook a lot of people up. And they said, she got it from the family, still not believing it. So what I had to do was to figure out how I could convince the DAR and the naysayers that Sybil did in fact take this ride. So I went to a place that I knew had some pretty valuable information and definitely had information on Martha Lamb. Martha Lamb was a historian. She had to have records. Somewhere in her box of information, there had to be an answer. So I went to the New York Historical Society. I began looking through Martha Lamb's notes. I did see a reference to a Ludington. Wasn't enough. Just wasn't enough. It talked about a Mrs. Ludington and owing her some money, and just wasn't enough. So I went to the head of manuscripts, and I said, there's got to be something in her records. He said, well, what exactly are you looking for? I said, something connecting her to the Ludingtons. He said, did you check the Ludington family papers? I said, what? He said, the Ludington family papers. Ladies and gentlemen, there was in the New York Historical Society 6 boxes of documents and letters from the Ludington family. Absolutely amazing. One of them was dated 1854, and it described the ride, and it described Sybil saving her father's life. I said, yes, that's it. Well, I submitted that to the local DAR, and I said, look, I think this is our proof. Closer look, I can do better. I can do better. Just an aside. When I was going through trying to prove that the DAR actually has been standing by Sybil's side since the very beginning, we owe a lot of gratitude to the local DAR, the Enoch Crosby chapter, because they helped put the statue on the lake. They helped Sybil get recognized. And in 1935, they helped to establish the route that she took. So 35, again in 61, I called the museum because I said, wait a minute. So they have a replica of the statue in Washington, D.C. at the headquarters? Whoa, they're supporting Sybil. I called and I asked if they could send me a picture of the exhibit. Oh my. 1, 2, 3 of my books were at the base of the statue. All 3 of those books describe the ride and describe what Sybil did that night. So it was clear to me that the DAR was in fact supporting Sybil and has supported her all along. So what's the problem? Well, the problem is the DAR has a very strict protocol on who does and doesn't become a patriot. And they stick pretty tight to that protocol. I knew what I needed was some kind of proof. What I was told that what I needed was to show that Sybil, in fact, acted as a soldier. Also, that Sybil had some proof of that ride while she was still alive. I needed some kind of document, some kind of letter or diary or something from the time that Sybil was still living, not 130 years later. So when I went to the New York Historical Society, this, by the way, is a pension letter with Sybil's name on it. Her husband served 3 times in the Revolutionary War. I knew the pension letters were invaluable because they're sworn statements. I combed those pension papers over and over and over again, trying to find some mention of her ride. What I did find was a mention of her father's involvement in the Revolutionary War. I found 6 pension records that specifically stated in the spring following, he marched with a company of militia from Frederickstown under command of Captain Joel Meade to Litchfield in Connecticut to intercept the British on their retreat from Danbury. They united with other companies near Campo Point in a regiment commanded by Colonel Henry Ludington. I have 6 pension records that specifically state the night that David Wooster was killed, the night that Danbury was raided. So I said, for those naysayers who said her father was not involved, I have proof he was. These are sworn statements, sworn documents. Ezra Ferris, same thing. Specifically mentions being with Colonel Ludington the night that David Wooster was killed. This is a deposition. I needed something out of Sybil's mouth that said that she at least was aware of what her father was involved in. This is a pension letter signed by Sybil when she was 73 years old. Jonathan Carley went to her and said, you know what I did for your father, and you know what your father did. Can you attest to that? She did. She wrote a beautiful letter explaining how her father was often called out on alarms and what he had to do to keep America free. This was another mind blower. In that box of letters, at the very top of this explanation of the ride, what Sybil did, it says, copied from article, mailed to Martha, or sent to Martha Lamb, 1878. She wrote the article in 1880. We had no sources for Martha Lamb. We do now. So, who was this? Charles Henry Ludington, the colonel's grandson, got very involved in his Aunt Sybil and his grandfather. And he felt that they were not getting the credit that they deserved. He and a cousin, really, second cousin, got together and they created a form for the Ludington family. And they sent it out to all the Ludingtons. And they said, what do you know about grandfather and grandmother? What do you know about Aunt Sybil? What do you know about the early days? And those people responded, and they sent letters back. Now, in 1854, Charles wrote a letter to Henry Deming, Esquire. He basically said to him, and this is a little difficult to read off the board, but he said to him basically, I know you're giving a speech for a statue being dedicated to David Wooster in Connecticut. I'm going to try to be there. But I want you to know that my grandfather was very involved in that battle, and so was my Aunt Sybil. And in this letter, he describes exactly what the ride was. However, I got a little nervous because what he basically said here was that she rode from Carmel to Cold Springs to let General Putnam know about what was happening in Connecticut. Well, I did a whole lot of research trying to see if Sybil actually was in Cold Spring and if in fact she met with the general. Don't know. I do know this. In later letters, he doesn't mention General Putnam again. He does, however, in every single mention of the ride, say that it was from Carmel to Cold Spring. So where did the ride come in, and how do we know where she rode? Well, in 1935, what happened was that the Education Department and the Highway Department decided that what they needed to do was to recognize patriots who have not been recognized, who have been slighted by history, and to try to find out more information about them. So they formed like a little committee, a group, to establish the route. And that is exactly what they did. They said, where could she have gone that night? How and why? And what they believed, and it was good thinking, that she more than likely went to her father's officers, probably captains, and had them gather their men, and then take those men and meet at the parade ground. So did she go to 400 houses that night? Of course not. However, if we follow the route that they created, it was about a 40-mile route. Difficult ride. Did she ride the same horse the whole time? I don't know. She could have changed horses. I have no record of that. Was there a horse named Star? I don't know. I have no record of that either. That came from more or less an embellishment in a fictional piece. And that was driving me crazy too, because one of the things that I kept running into was that there were fictional stories made on Sybil. And a lot of the naysayers were using that fictional information to say, Sybil never took that ride, that's nonsense. And what they were really condemning was the things that were not even meant to be true. They were fictional. So, what is the true story? I have this letter. I thought I had it. I said 1854. It's certainly before 1880. It was a grandson, but it turns out that good old Charles had a sister, Aunt Laura. Now, it wasn't Sybil's aunt, it was Sybil's niece, but she wrote to Charles's daughter, Catherine. And in that letter, it was a result of what Charles and Lewis S. Patrick were trying to do. Reach out to the family. Well, all the way in 1894, Charles's sister said, hey, I remember, and hard to read. She basically says in the letter that she was at the family reunions in 1825. She was 10 years old. Remember, Sybil died in 1839. And she recalled her grandmother and Sybil recounting the olden days. And what they were recounting, see if I can do this. That in the beginning of our American Revolution, that owing to the frequent and prolonged absence of our grandfather, the cares of their family, of our family, who were young, Aunt Sybil and Aunt Rebecca, being the eldest, were her only dependents, the former being about 15 years old, and she stood in the place of an older son to her father. She must have been a girl of wonderful presence of mind and strong determination under difficulties, as none other could have accomplished what she did when her father received orders in early evening that the British were landed or had landed at Norwalk and were on the way to Danbury's his regiment being disbanded and scattered to their homes. Wow, who's reading it? Good eyes. Scattered to their homes. They were called Minutemen, you know. Aunt Sybil mounted a horse at a moment's warning, and with only a halter to guide him, no saddle or even bridle, and rode through the woods nearly to the Hudson River, arousing the men, this in the night. So, this is a letter written by a woman who was alive while Sybil was alive, who was a niece of Sybil, a granddaughter of the colonel. She got the story from Sybil's mother and Sybil. Folks, they were the two people that were there at the night of the ride. How much closer can we get to the story? So, Aunt Laura calls her, she says, Aunt Sybil was a woman of strong character, remarkable intelligence, keeping up her interest in all public matters until the last. That letter that she wrote when she was 73 years old shows that she did, in fact, keep on top of things. She was still helping her father out when she was 73 years old. So, this is a letter from Sybil's granddaughter. I have a letter from every one of Sybil's grandchildren. I was able to track every single one of them down. And not only did I track the grandchildren down, I followed the line. I was able to find a young lady in California by the name of Kelly Turner, who is the great-great-great-great-granddaughter of Sybil. This letter here is from Emily Ogden. It's from Sybil's granddaughter, who unfortunately died at 21 years old of, could be yellow fever, could be the flu. But before she died, she wrote a letter to Paterson, New York, and to her father, Louis Ludington, trying to get information from Sybil about Sybil's marriage. She was trying to find out if anyone had Sybil's marriage certificate. The reason was that at 77 years old, Sybil stood by her son's side, watching him die. And when he did, she was so relieved, according to the letter, that he closed his own eyes and that she didn't have to close his eyes for him. She also says in the letter that her son left them penniless and they were broke. They had no money. So at 77 years old, she turned to the government and said, hey, my husband served 3 times in the Revolutionary War. They said, prove it, because that's what pension letters do. She did. The only thing she couldn't prove was that she was married to him. So they sent her back a letter that said, rejected due to insufficient proof of marriage. And at 77 years old, Sybil Ludington died. Broke, was put on the back of a buckboard and brought from Unadilla, New York to Paterson, where she was buried with her mother, her father, and I believe 2 of her siblings. So the real question is, what am I doing here? Why have I spent 20 years going through a woman's life and trying to convince the people in her own hometown that she was indeed a hero? Sybil Ludington stayed by her mother's side till she was 23 years old, till her mother had 11 of her 12 children. She married a 3-time veteran of the Revolutionary War. They ran a tavern near Route 22, near Paterson. When the war ended, business ended. So they went to the next New York City, Catskill, because Catskill had 24 taverns. Every time a steamship came up the Hudson, all those men came off and they went drinking at the taverns. It was a great place to make money. But in 1799, her husband died of yellow fever. The reason we didn't find his grave, what did they do with yellow fever victims? They burned them because they didn't want to spread the disease. So, at approximately 40 years old, she has a 13-year-old kid and she's a single mother. What is she going to do with this single kid? She opens a tavern, the only female out of 24 tavern owners. She runs the tavern for 7 years, sells it for almost 3 times what she paid for it, and her son, single mother, now a lawyer, is married to Julia Peck from Catskill. They have a baby. She sells the tavern. She goes up the turnpike as far as she can to Unadilla, New York, and the baby is one of 6 children, actually. You're one of 6 children, and he becomes a student of West Point, later becomes a soldier, and gives his life saving women and children in Fort Riley, Kansas. So not only was Sybil a hero, she raised one. She was an incredible daughter. She was an incredible wife. She was an incredible mother. She was an incredible single mother, an incredible businesswoman, an incredible daughter-in-law, stayed by her daughter's side for 30 years, according to the pension record. 30 years. At 73, she helped one of her father's soldiers get a pension, and at 77, she was still fighting to help her family. Sybil Ludington was an incredible woman. She was a hero. She represents what great Americans are all about. And in that light, we need to give her the respect that she deserves. I'm hoping now, with all of these new letters, and by the way, all of these letters are available for any one of you to see. At the New York Historical Society, all you need to go in and ask for the Ludington family papers, and you can go through the records yourself. So, with that in mind, thank you for listening, and I certainly would like to open the floor for questions. Thank you. Questions? Yes.
Her statue, does that have any likeness of what she actually looked like?
I'm glad you asked that because, by the way, I have to warn you that when you ask questions, you get another whole speech. So let me tell you a couple things with that. First of all, Anna Hyatt Huntington had no idea what Sybil actually looked like. We don't really have any paintings that I know of. There's certainly no photographs back in those days. So Anna Hyatt Huntington created what she believed Sybil Ludington looked like. But I need to tell you, the letter from Charles about the ride in 1854 says that she mounted the horse with a man's saddle and a hempen halter. His sister said she mounted the horse bareback and without even a bridle. Anna Hyatt Huntington put her on the horse side saddle in a skirt. So, nothing against Anna Hyatt Huntington because she helped to bring Sybil to light, but I think that was more dramatic than it was real. I have no proof that she rode any one of those 3 ways. One of the things about my book you're going to find is that I explore every possible statement made about Sybil, and I try to bring it to its source every single time so that we can eliminate the embellishments and we can eliminate the things that are not true about Sybil. I hope I answered your question. Another question.
They said that they were going to make a major film about her, and that they wanted the family to say what they were going to say is true, and they wanted to make it a love story, which it wasn't, and never did.
There are so many things. You know, Sybil Ludington strikes a chord with certainly all the people of Carmel, all the people of Putnam County, and she should be striking a chord nationally because she represents freedom. She represents American courage. There are so many acts in America that go unnoticed. And I want Sybil to be recognized because I want people to recognize each other. There's so many acts of bravery and courage that happen every single day. And they're done by people who are ordinary people. In many ways, Sybil was ordinary. But she was also an incredible American. Americans somehow are ready when they're needed. 9/11 was a wonderful example of how we come together when we need to. This girl, when she went out on that horse in that night, was likely never to come back. The people out there wanted to kill her father. It would have been wonderful for them to be able to teach him a lesson. But she went anyway because it was something she had to do. And it was a true call to arms. Yes?
The only thing Revere had that Sybil didn't was a poet.
Hey, there you go. My famous lines. Paul Revere went 12 miles, Sybil went 40. Paul Revere was 40-something, Sybil was 16. Paul Revere had 2 helpers, Sybil had none. Paul Revere got caught, Sybil didn't. So why aren't we honoring this girl? Yep.
Can you describe the path that her ride took?
Yeah, that's, again, it's very difficult. I take children. Every year, I've been doing it for years. I take them on school buses and I follow a path. But you have to understand, this was 1777. And it's very hard to picture this area in 1777. I tell the kids that I would take you on the exact route, but we'd all be dead because we'd have to go through the reservoir and die. And it was not going to happen. We don't know the exact route. We do know this. On that night, she went off from the house and she went out on a route to alert her father's troops. By the time morning came, they were on the parade ground and ready to leave. There was no one else to send. Sybil Ludington somehow knew how to get those men to her father's place. Am I surprised? No. She was 16 years old. Her father had a mill. Often, I believe, he brought grain to some of his troops. She would have gone with him on that buckboard. She was the only one who could possibly have known where those farmers were that night. They lived on 10, 20, 30 acres. Colonel had 225 acres of land. To find those farmhouses on that night, if she only found the captains, it still would have taken her about 40 miles. So and we do, have a list of all of the colonel's men. I know, because I went through their pensions. And I'm telling you, if you map out the officers, you would see that she more than likely could have gone to them, they would have gone to their men, and they would have met at the parade grounds. So why? A kid asked me, he said, why would her father send her on a ride like that? That was his daughter. Didn't he love her? And the bottom line was, A, there was no one else to send. B, he had to be there when the men arrived. Otherwise, the men would be at the parade grounds. They'd have no one telling them what to do. He had to be there. So she had no choice but to go. The messenger who came to the house, he had no idea where the colonel's men lived. And he had already come from Danbury. The guy was already probably exhausted and had more places to go besides the colonel's house. Yes?
Where was his house and where were the parade grounds?
Do you know where the 2 gas stations are on Route 52 at 312?
Yeah.
311? 311. There's 2 gas stations. That's the parade grounds. If you look behind the bush next to the first gas station going north, you'll see a sign that says parade grounds. But a tree is grown in front of it. It's pretty hard to see. Someone's going to have to cut that tree down. So that's the parade ground. And remember, his land extended all the way to pretty much Patterson. Other questions? You already asked one.
The evidence is that she did go all the way to Cold Spring, or not really?
Good question. Good question.
Maybe.
Remember, one of the things I did in this book, I do not make conjectures. I give you the facts as I know them. Now, as it is, every single mention of the ride. Willis Fletcher Johnson, who wrote the memoirs on Colonel Ludington, in the description of the ride, he says, even today, a ride from Carmel to Cold Spring is a hazardous ride in the night. But yeah, really, man, we know that. And you can imagine then, well, it's never, they never say. Mahopac Mines, Stormville, again, that route. Yeah, and people say, oh, so she only went to Cold Spring. It's 25 miles there and 25 miles back. That's 50 miles, not 40. So if she did go, it was even longer than we've been saying. Other questions? Yes?
You did a great job. You brought up a rumor to facts involving this.
Yeah, that's the whole thing.
Work that you did. And one sidebar to that, if I could add it. Some of us may have heard of Bill Nichols from Carmel, Nichols Radio and TV.
Yes.
1940 graduate of Carmel High School. I asked him, how did he happen to come to Carmel? And he said, well, he came back in 1777. I said, so you did? Because, yeah, his family was burned out of Danbury by the British.
Whoa, whoa. Yeah, you know, it's important for us. I've said this I've been very fortunate, and a lot of newspapers have been very kind to me, and they've written a number of articles. For this book alone, this is about, my wife and I have gone, this is like 24? We did 24 presentations already, and we have about 11 more. We've been as far as Fort William Henry in Lake George, because the colonel fought there. He watched his uncle and his nephew killed in front of him. And we believe they're buried up there at Fort William Henry.
Did anybody know a Sybil up there?
Yeah, well, they knew the story. Some knew, some didn't. Some read the book when they knew I was coming. So remember, the Call to Arms has been out for 20 years now. And that book has been out and around. But again, it was like just mind-boggling to go back and see all those things back again. And some of it ties to, believe it or not, an admirer of Sybil, Paula D. Hunt, who wrote a wonderful doctoral dissertation that was in the New England Quarterly, and in it she mentions that Sybil had difficulty with the DAR because they couldn't find information. Well, all the wonderful things she said about her in there went to the wayside. People went right to that sentence and they said, aha, they no longer believe in it. It's not true. I think what DAR needed was some documentation. I hope this answers what they're looking for. It certainly makes me feel a lot better to know that a niece who actually knew Sybil wrote a letter telling us what Sybil told her. It's pretty hard not to believe that. There are no other eyewitnesses. We're talking about Sybil, her mother, who was there that night, talking to their niece, who was old enough to understand what they were saying. So I believe that this may do it. However, have I stopped looking? No. 20 years from now, I want you to read my next book. I have to tell you, amazing research, because I mentioned to you it was Caroline Ludington, who was Frederick's daughter. she married Roland Patrick. They had a son, Louis S. Patrick. Now, Louis S. Patrick was very close to Charles, and the two of them worked together. So the letters that I found were pretty much Charles's letters. And it was pretty much that. Now, how did I get those? On the records, it said that Sybil, it said that the letters were donated by Jane Ludington. I had no idea. I said, Jane? I don't know what Jane Ludington. Folks, I've been to 6 family reunions. The Ludingtons call me Cousin Vinny. I've been to so many of them, and the patriarch lives in Canada. And I called him and I said, Ron, Jane Ludington? He says, Vin, she goes by Jane. We're talking about, and now all of a sudden I can't think of her first name, but she goes by Jane. I said, didn't I meet her? He said, in New Haven, at the family reunion, your wife and you were sitting on the bed talking to her and her husband, Charles. So I said, oh my God. And it turns out that Charles Ludington had a son who was Charles Henry Ludington Jr., and then he had a son who was Charles Townsend Ludington Jr., and Townsend Ludington, and then Charles Townsend Ludington Jr. is Jane's husband. The letters that I have from the Historic Society sat in a filing cabinet in their carriage house. She was afraid mice were going to eat it. So she took them and donated them to the Historic Society and never told anybody. So when I went there to go look for Martha Lamb's notes, there they were. So I called. First I wrote a letter to her because I didn't have her phone number. Then I called her and I said, hello, I'm trying to reach Jane Ludington. She said, oh, I'm sorry. Before I called her, I wrote her a letter in November. Didn't hear from her. By December, I said, I've got to find the number. And just at a gamble, I went online and looked up white pages for Jane Ludington, and there was a phone number. So I called, and I said, Jane, my name's Vin Dacquino. She goes, oh, Vinny, I'm so sorry I didn't answer your letter. I was like, whoa! and then she gave me the whole story, and she just went on and on about the letters passing. So the authenticity of the letters, she's still alive, and she can speak for those letters. And I don't have typed version. I have the real letters. They're in that box. They have, I couldn't believe that they even let me touch them, but they did, and they're there. Yep.
I just wanted to say something. I can't believe that these people had the peace of mind to save all this paper. Not knowing that
Amazing. I mean, you know, and people do that because what happens is they get them and they put them away and they say, you know, these are going to be important someday. I mean, how many things do I have in my attic that I've said that about? You know, we store things and store things and store things, and we throw them out the day before we need them, of course. But in this case, fortunately, she didn't throw them out, and she kept them, thank goodness, because now we have, and here's what I want to say. This is not family hearsay. This is family history. A letter from a family member who was with the person who committed the act and is relating what they heard from that person. That's not hearsay. That's history. Yes?
To the previous gentleman's point, what's really amazing is that they didn't go up in flames in a house fire or accidentally be thrown out. Not so much about their having the presence of mind to save them, but they could easily have disappeared.
The marriage certificate that kept Sybil from her pension got caught in a flood in Patterson. It was washed away. It was destroyed. So many records. One time, don't ever repeat this. I went to a library and they handed me a box because I was looking for deeds, and they handed me and they said, these are Ludington deeds. And I opened the lid and it crumbled to pieces in front of my eyes. I was like, oh my God. I put the cover back and I said, you really shouldn't let people see these like this. But that's what happens, and that's why I am so proud of the Putnam County Historian's Office and so many historians in this county who respect history. I've said this, I started to say it before, these newspapers, there's a quote they keep quoting me on because it's a quote I so firmly believe in. If we do not teach the children of today about their yesterday, we're stealing a piece of their tomorrow. We have to teach the children about the past. And Sybil Ludingtons have to go on the pedestals where they belong. With all of the things that are happening with kids today, and all of the problems that we see with children, we have to walk the heroes to their pedestals. And we have to show our children what Americans are really made of. Yes?
So, I don't know if you know who I am. Do you recognize me?
I'm trying.
I have to take, I'm not Sybil. I have to take a moment here to say and acknowledge Vincent, who was my hero and legend for the past 44 years. So I'm sitting here as amazed as I was in your 6th grade class 44 years ago. I'm Jill Halford.
Oh my God, Jill, how are you?
I have papers that I wrote in Dacquino that were in my attic that I have here that I've saved. But I just think you're acknowledging, Sybil, you have been acknowledged and recognized in my life for the past 44 years. I'm an educator, of course, because of Dacquino and several others largely. But my children and their children and children who I've taught all these years, I'm 56. So some of the kids I've had are 40, 30, they know you. They know you, and everything that you did for me and inspired me to be an educator, a writer. I've been a director of shows, everything. I tutor college essays. I'm a director right now of a preschool. I have my own business. It's all because of you.
Well,
So,
thank you.
I have pictures here. We're going to show everybody.
And I have to say,
You look exactly the same.
not only do I remember you, but you owe me a composition.
No way, but you're right about the children of today, and that's why I do what I do, but you've been saying this
Well,
for
thank you.
as many
Thank you.
years.
I appreciate that.
And it's the truth.
It's great to see you again.
And you deserve a lot of recognition, and you recognized all of us as students, this is what he did. We all felt recognized, important, and you made us what we are today, and there's so many people that feel the same way.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Andy?
But her family, her younger brother went out to Chicago to do business. His son went from, started a town in Michigan, Ludington, Michigan.
Yep, James.
Actually, he renamed it.
Their brother,
The,
Aunt Laura, her brother, helped to found Ludington, Michigan, and I think it's their brother too, that was the governor of Michigan.
There were 2 guys that building a sawmill in this
Yep.
town in Michigan.
Yep.
That was the only thing that was there. It was called, I can't remember the name of it, it's called something else. He renamed it Ludington,
Yep.
but he wouldn't sell the guy the other sawmill because he wanted it all for himself. And until he died.
Yeah. The Ludingtons were amazing people, and they still are. This Ron Ludington, who I'm in touch with, is in his 80s. Sybil died when she was 77. Her father was in his 70s. Her mother was 80. I mean, these people lived a long time. Her father, it bothers me very much too. Colonel Henry Ludington did so much for Putnam, Duchess Putnam. He was a justice of the peace. He was a colonel. He served until he died. And these are people who were dedicated, good people who believed in America. And they believed in freedom. And it was such a difficult time. And I tried to teach some of the children, when I take them on the trips to let them know how difficult it must be to know that your next door neighbor doesn't believe what you believe in. And the Revolutionary War was a bitter, frightening war when you didn't know if your next door neighbor would try to kill you or not. And Ichabod Prosser came to the Ludington house one night to kill Colonel Ludington. And Sybil helped her younger sisters put hats on. They stood in front of the shades and put the candles behind them. This is in the letter. And they put the candles behind them to make them look huge in the shades. When the soldiers looked in and saw them, they said, "Whoa, the house is fully guarded," and they left. And she saved her father's life. That is a patriotic act. And in that alone, she should be recognized. So I'm hoping that what's going to come now is that this will give Sybil the respect that she deserves. I hope it will stop some of the naysayers. I'll tell you now, it probably won't. There's still going to be people out there. And I will debunk the debunkers until I can't debunk them anymore. I started to tell you, Louis S. Patrick, where are his records? I tracked him down in 4 states, found out that he worked for a senator in Washington, D.C. And one night, he went out to get his wife an ice cream while the senator was away at a party. And he died of a heart attack on the street in front of the drugstore that he had gone to. Where are his records? I don't know. So, have I stopped? Is my journey over? Not even close. I hope it's enough to get her recognized as a national patriot. I'm going to keep trying, so I just hope that Sybil will get the respect she deserves. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
I have a question about the route that Sybil used to get
Okay.
Cold Spring to people. I wonder if it's possible through the post office to follow that.
Well, remember, we're talking 1777. I'll tell you one thing.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, she said, is there some way to find out if she actually made it to Cold Spring, a post office or something?
No, the route that she took.
Yep, to get there.
Post offices have a history of routes that were used
But
from
there was
that
no.
The possible route, to find the route, is to find the homes of the officers.
Yep, and
then
that's
find old
right.
survey maps.
Right. That's what the DAR did. They used a map from 1854, and they put the map out in front of them, and they went through that map and figured out exactly where the men were. It's logic. It's good thinking. Was it exactly the route she took? I don't know. I'll be honest with you. I don't know. But she did take a route that night, and she did call the men. And that part I know. Now, I'll also tell you something else that I'm on, and I'm happy to tell you. In that letter from Aunt Laura, she said that Sybil and Rebecca, get ready for this, were in Fort Montgomery the night it was attacked by the British. Now that is huge. If that's true, she is an even more amazing hero because almost everyone was killed that night. That was a massacre. It was a horrible battle. Now, I contacted the fort. They are all excited. And they are doing a whole research to try to pinpoint Sybil at the fort that night. Whether they're going to be able to find anything, I don't know. But, according to Aunt Laura, she was there at Fort Montgomery the night it was attacked.
I don't know if you know, but Brad Kendall, Dutchess County's clerk, has digitized his 18th century court documents. And I have here, from 1772 to 1784, Henry Ludington's list of papers.
Amazing. Amazing.
They can get it online.
And we have, online, you can get a list of all the troops, all the names. And I'm telling you, I went through their pensions. Some of them didn't have pensions, but you're talking handwriting. Very fortunate that the Ludingtons had wonderful penmanship. And I was able to read. You saw me reading right off the screen. And it's beautiful writing. Some of them is not. Some of it's very difficult to read. But it's there. I'm still convinced that there's even more proof of Sybils' ride. But how much proof do we need? What are we looking for? I'm hoping that there's people out there who are not using all their energies to find reasons not to believe in Sybil. Let's find reasons to keep her on the pedestal that we put her on and give our kids the role model that they deserve. Was she perfect? No. She ran a bar for 7 years. You know, I'm sure she had some hard times there. She probably threw out a couple of those guys from the ships. But in all, she was an amazing woman. She raised that child as a single mother, and she didn't quit till he died in front of her. She stayed by his side from his birth to his death. Amazing mother. And she helped him raise his 6 children. For 30 years she lived with him, raising those kids. I don't know how his wife felt about it. Yes.
I'm wondering if the reason that a female relative held on to all those records, because at that time women were insignificant. Actually, up until I think the 60s, women were insignificant for a lot of purposes. But so that's probably why she held on to it for so long, which we're lucky for, which might be something that you could put into with what you educate, because kids today,
Yeah.
I mean, we had a woman run for president, so they don't understand how women were viewed way back then.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
You know, people say to me, you know, why are there no military records for her? Women were not allowed to be soldiers. And yet, you heard Aunt Laura, Sybil acted as an older son to her father. So she did a lot of the duties. Would she have been a soldier? Probably, if they let her. And they said, when she did her pension, why didn't she mention the ride? Because she knew that she wouldn't be respected for it. Who cared if a woman took that ride? And why didn't any men mention her in their pensions? Because the government doesn't care who knocked on your door. They want to know if you were in the battle. Who warned you isn't a concern of them. Now it is. Now when we look back and we see what she did, we see it through new eyes. We see it through our eyes. But remember, Sybil came from the 1777s. Women were not respected. Check this out. That exhibit that my books are in, it says, Sybil Ludington, Kids of the American Revolution. Sybil was a child. Sybil was 16. Her mother was 14 when she got married and 15 when she had Sybil. Sybil wasn't a child. She was a grown woman who knew damn well that she could have been killed that night and went anyway. That's what we have to remember. Any other questions?
Is there a marked grave for her at Hudson?
Yes, there is a great, oh, okay, see? Don't get me started. Yes, there's a marked grave for her, and it says Sybil. Oh, this is off. It says Sybil, Sibbell, Ludington. About 25 feet from her grave, there's another sign that says Sibyl. Go to her statue, and on the statue itself, it says Sybil. Go to the street right in front of her, and it says Sibyl. I have in my new book a history of all the spellings of her name. And people just didn't, they didn't know how to spell. They spelled it the way it sounded. And Colonel Ludington, every time he signed a letter, I have his signature all over the place. Luddenton, Lud. I mean, guessed every time he signed. So, is it still the same person? Yes. Did she spell it 11 different ways? Yes. Even her signatures. I have 3 signatures from Sybil, all spelled differently. That's what they did. Any other questions?
I think it was on 60 Minutes this week. We were talking about some women that are dealing with how few female statues and things
Yep.
around the country.
Yep.
And what you've done is you've established. I said, well, we have an architect.
I know.
It's remarkable.
Listen, let me say this. Sybil Ludington belongs to you. Give her the credit she deserves. Help me fight for civil rights. Thank you.